Welcome back to my Road to No Way Home series. This is the series on my channel where I've decided to take it upon myself to rewatch all the live-action Spider-Man movies leading up to and including Spider-Man No Way Home and give my thoughts on all of them in review format. Today, I'm going to be talking about Spider-Man Far From Home, and I kind of have a lot to say about it. Not all of it's positive, most of it's positive, but I'm kind of conflicted on the movie. It's in a weird area. I remember when I first saw the movie, I went with one of my close friends. We saw it in theaters, had a fantastic time, probably my best experience at a Spider-Man movie. Not the best Spider-Man movie I've seen, but my best movie-going experience with a Spider-Man film. I remember the two of us lost our minds with the cliffhanger after credit scene and everything like that. It was a really good experience. But now rewatching the movie alone, just to go through it again, definitely didn't have as much fun as I did when I saw it that first time. And I kind of get it. It sunk in more of the problems and flaws that the movie had that I didn't really get the first time that I saw it. So yeah, I think the biggest problem of, you know what, let's go with the positives first. Before I start talking about all the negatives, don't want to make this too heavy and upsetting. So positives, Tom Holland, Zendaya, the whole cast, they all do a great job. Jake Gyllenhaal definitely really steals the show as Quentin Beck, aka Mysterio. He's a fantastic Spider-Man character, and he does a great job portraying him in this new take that they have on the character in the movie. Um, all the action scenes were really good. Especially the ending fight between Spider-Man and Mysterio, and most notably, the best scene in the movie is when Mysterio traps Spider-Man in all of his illusions. And I forgot to mention this, but all these videos are spoiler heavy. I probably should have mentioned that before I started getting into it. So if you haven't seen Far From Home, I'm sorry that I spoiled, part of the movie, but I'm sure you've seen it or you didn't care if you watched this video. And this is a part of a series where I've mentioned multiple times throughout the series that, you know, I spoil every Spider-Man movie as I'm talking through this review. So, if I happen to catch you off guard, my bad. But I'm going to go back to what I was saying now. The ending sequence, not the ending fight between Mysterio and Spider-Man was good, and I really love their illusion sequence that he had beforehand, like 30 minutes before. It's a fantastic, phenomenal looking sequence, really great visual effects. I love it. It's so cool. I lost I was just blown back when I first saw it in theaters. It was crazy, and it still holds up watching it on the small screen. um I like Peter's new suit. I like it more than the blue and red one. uh I think it's the design. I generally prefer the blue and red suit when it comes to Spider-Man, but I think that this black and red one works with the design that they have for it in the MCU, and I'm looking forward to it. My only gripe with it is something I had with the first Spider-Man suit. I don't like the tiny spider. Like, I don't like the tiny spider emblem. I prefer it with like the big spider emblem, which is something that appears to be what they're fixing in No Way Home, because I have seen some shots of his new suit, and it's got like a big spider that goes across his entire chest. So that is something I'm looking forward to. But sticking to this movie, I don't like the small spider, but outside of that, I like everything else in the suit. I like that Peter makes his own suit this time. Sure, he uses Tony Stark's technology, but that's fine. I can live with that. Um, what else? It's still funny. It's not as funny as Homecoming. Yeah, it's not as funny as Homecoming, I will say that. But I did still enjoy the comedy in this movie, most notably the relationship between Ned and Betty Brant is it's so good. It's just so funny. Like, I just wasn't expecting that. That is definitely like within their wheelhouse of comedy that is definitely in tone and in sync with Homecoming. And Nick Fury being the straight man is just hilarious constantly. He's probably the funniest character in the movie outside of Ned and Betty's duet. Um, Brad, Peter's like jerk rival. I enjoyed him sometimes. Like, he was a bit of a dick, which I get was the point, but like, I think it was really funny when MJ finally gave him his comeuppance at the end of the movie. I thought that was a really well executed moment. That was funny. The teachers that Peter has are really funny, especially JB Smoove. He is hilarious in the movie. He's like this weird conspiracy theorist that's always just like trying to shirk off responsibility, and it's great. I love it. Yeah, I don't. Is that it? Like, I did enjoy this movie, but I can't really think of much more that I enjoyed. Like, cause I'm gonna talk in length about stuff that I think is wrong with it, but like I don't want to make it seem like I didn't enjoy watching this movie because I would rewatch it again, but I don't really have. I can't think of much else to say because like most of my gripes are with the story and its connection to the MCU, and I don't want to just harp on that without saying the positives because I really did like the movie, and I don't want to make it seem like I hate it, and then I'm just being like, no, it's Spider Man, so I'm glossing it over for the few positives because I did enjoy it. And, like, I enjoyed it so much, I still want to see the next one, not just because it's in the MCU, but because I want to see the next installment in this franchise. I want to see where it's going, and I just I mean, music score is still good. The Spider-Man score is still really good. I guess that really is it. Um, yes, right. Uh, the ending swing that Peter has is probably my favorite one in like any live action Spider-Man movie. Now, I still hold my stance that I mentioned in previous videos that the Amazing Spider-Man has the best effects when it comes to Peter's fights and his swinging, but I enjoy his ending swing in Far From Home the most because it just looks like Peter's having a ton of fun. Like he's just flipping around and doing all this crazy stuff, and it's enjoyable. So I like that a lot. All right, I guess it's time to get into the negatives then, because I can't really think of anything else to talk about that I like that was positive in the movie. Um, okay, so here we go. Get into the negatives. Biggest problem with Spider-Man: Far From Home, in my opinion, is that it has an identity crisis because in part, it's trying to be a Spider-Man movie. It's trying to hold true to its nature that it had in Spider-Man Homecoming, but then at the same time, it feels like Marvel and Disney are trying to force it to be a light-hearted palate cleanser because we just came fresh off of Endgame. Like it's like half the movie's trying to be a Spider-Man movie, and the other half is trying to be an epilogue for Avengers Endgame, and they keep conflicting with each other because it's like on one hand, it's like okay, we can tell jokes, but we want to tell a serious story because it's still a Spider-Man movie, and on the other hand, it's like okay, but like we want more jokes because we're trying to make people less sad since we just killed off like three of their favorite heroes. So it's just like it, it's a weird balancing act that I don't think they did very well. Like there are moments that are just like, okay, I get it, that's supposed to be funny, but then other times it's like this doesn't really work, and I'm not really enjoying it. Like the movie opens up with a joke about all the superheroes dying with this crappily made YouTube, um, excuse me, tribute video um, about the Avengers who died, and I'm just like, I get what you're going for here, but like this isn't very funny. It just didn't work for me. I understood the joke, but it just didn't work for me, and I was just like, it feels like it's diminishing the events of Endgame, and I didn't really like it very much. And then this movie will get ridiculously serious in very brief moments, but then it won't have the time to explore that. Like Peter is having a mental breakdown this whole movie because he misses Tony and he doesn't believe he can live up to him, but everyone around him expects him to step up and become the next world's greatest hero, become the new Iron Man, this leader of the Avengers, and he's not ready for that. He doesn't want to do it. He's on a technical standpoint, he's ready for it, but psychologically, Peter is not ready to do these things. So he's kind of freaking out over it. And there's like two scenes in the movie where you actually get to see Peter deal with that, like where it's just him freaking out over it. There's a scene at the beginning of the movie where he goes to the charity thing that Aunt May runs, and all the people asking him questions like, "Oh, are you going to be the next Iron Man? Are you an Avenger? What's going to happen if aliens come back? What are you going to do? Blah 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 blah." And he freaks out and he starts panicking and he runs away. and then he's like perched up on a building. He's like trying to calm down, and then he sees a mural of Tony, and it doesn't really help his situation. And then he's just like, nah, you know what? I'm not gonna think about it. I'm just gonna go on vacation. I'm gonna chill. I'm trying to hook up with MJ. Like, and just it's just like you were on the verge of like just total breakdown, and now you're just kind of like brushing it off because you don't want to think about it. Which, yeah, that is a coping mechanism that people use. I get that, but still, it felt like the movie was shying away from it. And then at the end of the movie, which I do love the scene where he just full on breaks down when he's talking to Happy. It's a really good scene, but it's just like that's it. You have those two scenes because you wanted to tell a bunch of jokes in the middle to be a nice palate cleanser because Endgame was so serious, and I feel like that just didn't really work. Like it just keeps contradicting itself, which is the biggest problem that I have with this movie. Is that it's just like, oh yeah, it's a Spider-Man movie where it can be lighthearted but also very serious, and then it's like, but we don't want it to be too serious because we want it to be a palate cleanser for Endgame. Like Spider-Man: Homecoming was a very fun movie and it's very funny, but it was also ridiculously serious when it needed to be, like Peter getting trapped under the rubble. That scene is just so good because it really builds the tension and you feel the danger and stress that Peter's under. Adrian Toomes, the Vulture, is a very menacing villain, and he doesn't even have to be around all that much. You still feel his presence and his threat level, even though he's not around. He's a small villain who, yeah, sure, he can't take out the Avengers or anything like that, but he's a threat to Peter, which is great. You feel that impact when he's on screen. I don't feel that way with Mysterio. Like, I think Jake Gyllenhaal did a great job. I think they did a good job portraying Mysterio as a character, but like his goals, I just don't really feel his goals in this movie. He's like, he wants to trick the world into being a superhero, which is something that's in the comics, but it's just like his reasons for wanting to do it are kind of stupid because his whole thing is that Tony is that the barf, the glasses that Tony wore in a previous MCU movie. He is something that Quentin Beck designed. It was his augmented reality that he created, and Tony just made a joke out of it and then fired Quentin shortly afterwards. So Tony hooked up those augmented reality glasses to a bunch of drones that are in a giant satellite in space, which I'll get to that momentarily. I have issues with that as well, but he hooks them up to that and he gives them to Peter, which I think is stupid because Spider-Man doesn't need. He gave them to Peter, and then Quentin's whole plan is to steal them from Peter and then use them for his own gain so that he can trick the world into believing that he's this great superhero, and then, he'll gain like fame and wealth and whatever. But like, why? Like it would be different if his plan was to gain recognition for what he had done. That makes more sense. Like in the comics, it makes sense that Quentin Beck wants fame and fortune because his backstory is completely different than it is in the movies. Quentin Beck in the comics was a special effects artist who worked on movies before he became Mysterio. So it makes sense that someone of that caliber who's in the entertainment industry wants to be recognized for their feats. But Quentin Beck was a scientist. So like why does he want the world to believe he's a superhero when like after he got the glasses back, he could just be like, yeah, okay, so like I'm actually an inventor. I invented these, and Tony Stark, didn't tell anybody about it. He fired me because he said I was mentally unstable. Like I feel like that would have been a better plan than tricking the world into believing he's the greatest superhero and receiving recognition for that, which also this is something that I feel contradicts statements that come up later in the MCU. Superheroes aren't paid because in Falcon and the Winter Soldier, Sam has sorry, spoilers for Falcon and the Winter Soldier, small bit. In Falcon and the Winter Soldier, Falcon, aka Sam Wilson, has money troubles because they don't get paid. Everything was funded by Tony. So if superheroes aren't paid, then what does Quentin actually gain from being the world's greatest superhero? He doesn't gain money. He gets recognition. Like people will know who he is. They'll know his face. But He's not getting fame and fortune. So, like, if he's not telling everybody that he created the augmented reality, he's not telling everybody that the drones function off of his software, and he's not getting any money from becoming the world's greatest superhero, what exactly is he doing it for? What's the point then? Because he's not getting revenge on Tony because Tony's already dead. He doesn't revenge on Peter because he doesn't see Peter as, like, a threat to his life until Peter tries to literally stop what he's doing. So what exactly does he gain from doing all of this? It just doesn't make any sense to me. Like, it's just a flaw in the writing. And granted, I will say this is Falcon and Winter Soldier did come out after Far From Home, so this is something that is a problem that uh, is a problem that developed after the movie came out, but it's still a problem nonetheless. Like, just because you add more depth to the universe in a later installment doesn't mean it won't affect the way previous installments are perceived. For example, like with Star Wars, people love specific aspects of Star Wars, but all the new things that get added into the universe, like the whole thing with what is it? Uh the Jedi and everything. They're like, if there were so many Jedi, why did they just let things go bad and so on? And so, like, they're like nitpicks that people go through with the Star Wars universe as they add more things to the depth. Oh, like here it is, like with the Mandalorian. So, uh, the Mandalorian in the Mandalorian never takes off his helmet. And then it's just like, but wait a minute, that caused an issue with the other Mandalorian. So then they had to, because they take off their helmets. So what's going on here? So then they add more story saying that there are different factions of Mandalorians, that some can take off their helmets and some can't. They had to add that in to then equate for the fact that they have this new story element. And they didn't do that here in the MCU. Each thing works separately. Like Falcon and the Winter Soldier is an okay show. Um, and that, the money trouble works for that. But then now that affects Spider-Man, but Spider-Man Far From Home in a vacuum works well because, like, okay, Quentin Beck's plan is to get fame and fortune, by becoming the world's greatest superhero and getting recognition for everything that he's doing. But now if you put them together as a part of the same universe and film, like, extended franchise, it goes, okay, well, wait a minute, if heroes don't get paid, then all he's getting is recognition. So if he's just getting known for being Mysterio, then how exactly him and his team gonna get paid? This doesn't really work very well. It doesn't line up properly. Like, you didn't think this through, and that's just another thing. It's another thing that bothers me about this not just being a Spider-Man film, is that they try to connect it too much to the MCU, which, like, Homecoming, I feel like justified it enough. It's like, okay, this happened right after Civil War. That's how Peter and Tony met, and Peter idolizes Tony Stark. That's it. That's as far as it goes. And then and then the Vulture. It's like the Vulture lost his job as a result of the damage control committee that was created to clean up all of the um, outbreaks from alien invasions and the Avengers battles and so on and so forth. So that's it. Those two things are what connect Spider-Man Homecoming to the rest of the MCU. They have jokes and everything like that in the movie, but, like, those are the two main things that connect it to the rest of the MCU, and then it's able to tell its own self-contained story. Far From Home is not like that. Everything that happens in Far From Home is related to something else that happened in the MCU. Nothing in that movie is exclusive to Spider-Man. Mysterio exists because of something Tony Stark did. Mysterio is taking advantage of the state of the world as a result of what happened in Endgame. Peter is upset because Iron Man died in Endgame. Uh, Peter and his classmates aged up when he didn't because he got blipped away in Infinity War. Like, everything that happens in Nick Fury and Maria Hill are Skrulls because they swapped out with the originals after the events of Captain Marvel and everything. Like, everything that happens in Far From Home is a direct result of something else that happened in the MCU. And because of that, there's no room for them to just tell a Spider-Man story, which is why certain things in the movie come out of nowhere. I mentioned this in my previous video, these two things in my previous video that I wanted to bring up here, which are Aunt May and MJ. I already talked about how MJ um, shows her affection for Peter all throughout the first Homecoming. But Peter, on the other hand, I get it. He's a hormonal teenager, so once he loses one girl, he'll move on to the next one. That's fine. But also at the same time, Peter and MJ are kind of like distant from each other. They're like barely even friends in the first movie. But now Peter is like in love with her the same way that he is with Liz. And again, I get that Peter Parker is a high school student, so like it's understandable that he's a hormonal teenager. Like he's 16. Like teenagers flip flop with their relationships all the time. But as a movie, it just comes out of nowhere. Peter's like, I'm in love with Liz. I want to be with Liz. And then the beginning of this movie, like one of the first scenes he has in this movie, he like sits down with Ned. He's like, all right, bro, I've got this like 12-step plan to make MJ my girlfriend over the course of this vacation trip that we're having. And it's like, oh, okay. I guess you're in love with MJ now. All right, we're here, I guess. Like it just his affection, like his deep rooted affection for her, just comes out of nowhere because they didn't get time to develop it because they had to put all this other stuff in the movie. And the same thing with Aunt May. Aunt May being okay with the fact that Peter is Spider-Man is ridiculous. Like Aunt May is always concerned that Peter is Spider-Man, because she's afraid that he'll die because it's a dangerous job, but she accepts it and she allows him to do it. This version of Aunt May is kind of tarnished because she uses Spider-Man for charity events. She like outwardly encourages him, packs his suit for him in his suitcase and everything like that, which did bring for some comedic moments, but at the same time, it's like, do you not care that your nephew, the person that you view as your own son, is out there fighting aliens and robots and supervillains and all these dangerous threats? Like, there are scenes in the movie where there's a scene in the movie where Happy is literally talking to May, and he's just like, yeah, you were right, the kid did great, I had nothing to worry about. And it's just like, you weren't concerned that he was fighting these freaking giant elemental monsters and these killer drones and Mysterio and all this. You weren't concerned about that. You were like, oh, my nephew Spider-Man, he can do it. And she's barely in the movie, which is another problem, is that her finding out Peter is Spider-Man is the cliffhanger of the first movie. That should have been an integral part, like an integral part of the plot for Far From Home. But it's not, because Peter isn't in New York for the entire movie, which is another colossal mistake. Spider-Man is the New York superhero. I get it, Spider-Man does leave New York from time to time, but that should only happen in movies that aren't Spider-Man related, like Avengers movies or like Fantastic Four movies that are going to be coming out in the future. Like if Spider-Man leaves New York in those movies, that's fine. But as for a Spider-Man movie, he should be in New York because everything he cares about is in New York. All of his friends, his family, his school, his home, everything that Peter cares about is in New York because it's his city. He's the protector. He's the friendly neighborhood Spider-Man. He defends New York. But you took him out of New York, so now it's like you have to create these threats, which is why Peter is on a school trip so that his friends can be in danger and they're forcibly put in danger. But it's just like, you could have just left him in New York and this would have, worked a lot more, because the whole tension of the final scene between Peter and the Vulture in Homecoming happened because the plane was going to crash into New York. That's where Peter lives. That's where he cares about everything, which is why he had to save it. But like, if it was gonna crash into like London, I'd be like, okay, yeah, he has to stop it because like a bunch of people are gonna die. But it doesn't have the same emotional impact because no one Peter gives a damn about lives in London. Like, it's just a bunch of random people. I get it, like, as a superhero, he would care and he would have to stop it, but it's not the same level as, oh, I have to save everybody I know. Every Spider-Man story has that same threat, is because when New York is going to be destroyed, everything that Peter loves is going to be destroyed too. So he cares about it. Every Spider-Man movie gets that, except this one. Because, again, it was forcibly trying to equate for all these other factors that take away from the fact that it's supposed to tell a Spider-Man story first, which is the biggest issue that this movie has. And it's so upsetting because there was so much that they could have done with this movie. They could have told a really compelling and deep story about the fact that Peter and his aunt are now have a rift between them because she doesn't want him to be Spider-Man, but he still feels it's his responsibility. They could have went a whole route, told an entire story based off of that, had a villain show up that Peter has to stop and have Aunt May come to an understanding. She may not like it, but like they could have done something with that, but they don't. This movie starts off and she's just perfectly fine, the Peter Spider-Man, and now she just is around for jokes that she's, hooking up with Happy Hogan. It's just like, it's funny, but what does that do emotionally? It doesn't do anything for the story. Like, it doesn't do anything emotionally. Like, it's just jokes because they're telling jokes. Like, every joke in Homecoming was benefited by the fact, like, okay, Peter's in high school and weird dumb crap happens in high school, so it was endearing and it made sense for like the setting that he was in. But these jokes were literally developed from scratch to just happen. Like Happy and Aunt May, I don't even think they see each other, let alone talk to each other in Homecoming. So it's just a mess, like thematically, because they're trying to do too much, which is very, very unfortunate. And I can talk about this now because everyone is aware of what Spider-Man No Way Home is going to be about at this point. So, something that was theorized back when Far From Home originally came out is that the following movie, the third Spider-Man installment, which we now know is No Way Home and going to be about the multiverse, originally the theory was that the movie was going to be about Kraven the Hunter and the Chameleon as the antagonist, because Kraven would be hired to hunt down Spider-Man now that he's public enemy number one, since Mysterio revealed his identity in the first post-credit scene of Spider-Man Far From Home. And the reason why people came up with this theory is because, as I mentioned, the Chameleon as well, is that there is a character named Dimitri who is working for S.H.I.E.L.D., who drives Peter around. And when Peter first puts the Edith glasses on in the movie, and it scans everybody in the, excuse me, in his bus, and it like gives like all the classmates, it gives them like a little header and like tells them like who they are and everything like that. And when it goes to Dimitri, it says cannot be accessed. Now, granted, now it's probably just because he's a S.H.I.E.L.D. agent, so it was blocked. But at the time, people were like, okay, well, there's the character, the Chameleon's real name is Dimitri, and he's the brother of Kraven the Hunter. So, with Peter's identity revealed, most likely Dimitri and the Chameleon will be the antagonists, and they'll go after Peter in the next movie, and that's what the third installment will be about. Obviously, it's not the case, as I mentioned, but it made sense, and it was interesting, and it would have been a really impactful Spider-Man story that would have been self-contained to Spider-Man. But again, as hyped as I am about No Way Home, and as excited as I am about all the classic villains coming back and the multiverse being brought up and everything like that, and having Doctor Strange and Peter bounce off of each other, because I think they have really good chemistry, it needs to focus on being a Spider-Man story. And I believe it will be from the trailers and everything. It looks like they're going to tell a compelling Spider-Man story first, but at the same time, it's just like the fact that they went with the multiverse instead of just telling a Spider-Man story where he's public enemy number one is just like, you're still trying to do too much, and you need to wheel it back a bit. But there's nothing to do. Like, it's one of the issues that I mentioned at the beginning. It's the big issue that the cinematic universe has, is that it's a cinematic universe. So whenever they tell a story, it's self-contained to a degree, but it also has to remember all the events that happened prior and what's going to happen in the future to then tell their story. Like, I feel like every Marvel writer is probably given some sort of notice as to what happens in the future before they write their story. Like, they sit down, they're like, all right, I want to tell this story, and it's like, okay, well, this is what happened before, this is what currently exists, and this is what we're planning to have exist, and what's planning to happen in the future in the grand scheme of things. So work in the literally, it's the equivalent of what Tony told Peter at the beginning of Homecoming. Don't do anything I would do, and definitely don't do anything I wouldn't do. There's a small little gray area in there. That's where you work with. I feel like that's what every Marvel writer has when they're creating these stories. And some of them come out fantastic. Some of them come out phenomenal. But usually the ones that end up being phenomenal are the ones that are so completely dejected from the rest of the MCU that they could just tell their own story. Like Guardians of the Galaxy and Thor Ragnarok and the first Homecoming. They were able to, like, deject themselves enough from the rest of the MCU. They had the nice little gray area to work with, and they expanded it beyond that, which is why they're the best Marvel movies, or like the first Iron Man. There wasn't a huge cinematic universe for it to pull its lore from before it could start developing the story. So it told the Iron Man story, and it's one of the best MCU movies. Same thing with Captain America: Winter Soldier. It focused on being a Captain America movie first because it didn't have this huge lore to work with, and that's what I think is a problem that they need to fix going forward, because Far From Home is definitely a key example of this problem, because everything in this movie has to do with the MCU and very little of it has to do with Spider-Man, which is why I understand why people have so many gripes with Far From Home. A ton of people don't like Far From Home because it doesn't feel like a Spider-Man movie. It feels like an MCU movie featuring Spider-Man, which is wrong. It should be the other way around. But there's nothing that can really be done about that. Like, we're getting No Way Home isn't out right now, but so that's 4 Spider-Man movies because they contract. Marvel and Sony made a deal. Tom Holland is going to be making Spider-Man 4 through 6. So if you include No Way Home, which isn't out at the recording of this video, that's 4 more Spider-Man movies that are going to take place in the MCU. And currently, with the events of No Way Home that are going to happen, they're bringing in villains from the multiverse. So you have Tom Hardy's Venom, you have Willem Dafoe, Flint Marko, the Lizard from the Amazing Spider-Man, Electro from the Amazing Spider-Man. Like, they brought in all of these characters and villains. Alfred Molina, who played Doc Ock phenomenally in Spider-Man 2. Like, bring in all these characters from like outside of the MCU, and now you're telling another trilogy after this movie comes out. So like at some point throughout that trilogy, they're gonna bring in Venom. But like now the problem is that Venom is completely different than he is in the comics. So how are you gonna tell the storyline of Peter connecting with the symbiote and getting the black suit, and then him being at odds with Eddie Brock? Because Eddie and Peter are usually like around the same age in most iterations, and now that's not the case. So, because like Tom Hardy is way older than Tom Holland, so you can't tell that same level of storytelling where Peter and Eddie are like somewhat close or like at odds with each other as rivals, being around the same age and doing the same job, and now Eddie hates Peter, and like you can't really tell that same story, especially since Eddie's already bonded with Venom and their team. So like, what are you gonna do here? Like, and Venom isn't necessarily a villain, so what are they gonna do with that? And then what's gonna happen to all the villains in this movie? Are they all gonna go back? Are some of them gonna stay? What, like, there's so much that they can do. And then on top of that, you still have the Sony villain movies, because Sony is now, 2 of them I think are ridiculously stupid. One of them I think can definitely work. The other one I'm skeptical of. Sony is making a Morbius movie. They're making a Kraven the Hunter movie. They're making a lizard movie. No, not the lizard. A Rhino movie and a Sandman movie. Rhino and Sandman do not need their own solo films, and those are going to crash and burn. If they happen to not crash and burn, I was wrong. I had a bad take. But if you're a Spider-Man fan, Rhino and Sandman are just villains. Like, they're thugs who happen to have superpowers. They're not compelling. Kraven the Hunter, I feel like maybe there's a small chance you could tell a compelling solo story with Kraven the Hunter. But most of his cool stories happen because he's hunting Spider-Man. Like, Kraven the Hunter is the world's best hunter, and he wants a challenge, so he hunts Spider-Man, which is what makes him interesting. I like that. And then Morbius, I think you can actually tell an interesting story with Morbius. Like, he has an interesting origin as a character, which I'm looking forward to see when the movie inevitably comes out in like a couple months. But they're doing all of that. And if Far From Home is a representation of how they handle Spider-Man when there's too much going on in the universe that they want to get across, then this is going to be a huge problem, because if they have all that going on and they're going to try and manage it, it's just going to become like a huge mess, and then it's not going to work out again. Because although I do enjoy Far From Home, it has all of its problems, as I've been saying this whole time. And I'm just concerned. I'm just concerned. But at the end of the day, like I said, I did enjoy Far From Home. I will watch it again in the future. And I just hope they alleviate this issue with it being too cluttered, so they can focus up more on a Spider-Man story and stop taking Spider-Man out of New York unless it's in, spin-off movies that he shows up in as cameos. Okay, Spider-Man movies do their best in New York. He is a New York-based superhero. Everything he cares about is in New York. Keep him where all of the stuff that he cares about is, because it'll help make the story more compelling. And also, make him poor again. Seriously, like, a big part of Spider-Man's character is that he's like Joe Schmo. He's poor man. Everyone can relate to Peter Parker because basically everyone in the world is to some degree poor. They understand Peter's struggles because everyone understands the struggles of needing money, of being, late for rent, or not being able to make their plans because they have to do work and so on and so, like, make him poor again. Please stop giving him all of this like high technology and like all of Tony Stark's old gear that he's able to repurpose into Spider-Man gear. Stop doing it. He's not the successor to Iron Man. That's Riri Williams, and she's already getting her own stuff. So stop making Spider-Man the second Iron Man, because he's not, which I hope they rectify with No Way Home. I think that's it. I think that's it. I talked about, like, how Spider-Man Far From Home was cluttered, and then spoke about how what I liked about the movie, didn't like about the other things. So I think, yeah, pretty sure that's it. Oh, I guess I can mention this here, since this is something that I don't think I'll be able to mention anywhere else because this is from Endgame. But something that happened at the end of Endgame is that people believe that Gwen Stacy has been introduced into the MCU, because there is a character at the end of Endgame who walks by when like Peter and Ned meet each other in the hallway for the first time, and she has Gwen Stacy's iconic look. Um, she's wearing like her like jean jacket and like the black web skirt and everything like that, and she's got the blonde hair, and so people think that's Gwen Stacy, and that'd be really cool. She didn't show up in Far From Home, so there's no confirmation on that. Maybe she'll show up in No Way Home or one of the 3 Spider-Man movies that are coming out afterwards. Who knows? But I don't know. It would be cool, and I felt like I should mention that here because there's nowhere else that I would really mention it. And with that, that'll be the end of my thoughts on Spider-Man Far From Home. And wow, that's it. Next week's the big week. No Way Home finally comes out. I am greatly looking forward to it. It's probably like my most anticipated movie of this year, if I'm being honest. Um, yeah. Oh, one of the other one I'm looking forward to is The Kingsman, which I will also be hopefully I'll be doing a review on that because I really want to see The Kingsman. Yeah. So with that, that'll be the end of this review. I hope you enjoyed it, and if you did, like, comment, and subscribe. Let me know your thoughts on Spider-Man Far From Home. If you liked it, if you felt it was cluttered, let me know. I'm curious. And as always, my thumbnail is done by CuriTuber. He has a Twitch channel if you want to check him out. Link is always in the description. And remember, folks, you're innocent until proven villainous, and I will catch you in the next one.